because it can be distracting.
Here I am.
Okay, and I'll back it up with this as well, which is another little recorder thing, just in case something happens to that one.
You're going to come back a number of times.
Yeah,
because
sure.
The stories I have are...
Yeah, no, we don't have to get everything this... is this recording? We don't have to get everything this time. Do you mind if I rest this on your computer?
Just put down the
Right.
cover.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, I was born in 1928.
Okay.
My father was 60 years old.
Okay.
And my mother was 28.
Wow. Sounds like there's a story there.
They became a couple because my father was an Orthodox Jew, and he had a first marriage that didn't work out, and the first wife passed away, and he was extremely anxious to have children. Mm. So he went to a synagogue, and in that synagogue there was a man who was an agent. He sent people out to work on jobs. Mm-hmm. And my mother was one of the people that he sent out. Mm-hmm. And she was working in a hotel in the Catskills for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. And my father had a lot of property up there. Mm-hmm. My father was a very wealthy man at that time, mm-hmm. because he had a lumber company in Brooklyn on the East River. Mm-hmm. And when the First World War broke out, mm-hmm. The government gave him a contract to build the crates that they put the war weapons in that were shipped to England. Right. So he had a big contract. So it was a big contract. He made a lot of money. Yeah. They invested it in stocks mostly. But my father, being European, he believed in property, mm-hmm. that you have to have land. Mm-hmm. So he bought property in the Catskills mm-hmm. and in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. And that money that he invested at that time was all he had left in 1929 when everything blew up. Right. But he married my mother in 1925. Yeah. So at that time he was still... So there was sort of 4 years of... Good living. My mother had 4 years of fabulous living. And then she went back to where she was. Yeah. But anyway... Where were they born, your parents? My father was born in Austria, in a small place about 50 miles from Vienna. Okay. In Galicia? Was he Galiciana? Yeah. Yeah. My mother was born in Poland, uh-huh. And she spent most of her time in Krakow. A story goes with that, but I won't interrupt now. Okay. But anyway, so that was the couple. Right. And my father was willing to do anything for my mother. She was a pretty girl, and he loved her, and she would, because of her age, he was sure she was going to have children. Right. So she asked him to buy her a restaurant. And he picked out a place on Ridge Street, mm-hmm. because Ridge Street, where the restaurant was, about a half a block away from East Houston Street. And on East Houston Street, there was a big fruit vendor, and he would sell the fruit to the peddlers that would take it on their... He was like a wholesaler. He was a wholesaler, right. Yes. And my parents felt that a lot of the peddlers would come there. Mm. And a lot of the peddlers didn't have families that were still in Europe. They were here alone. So they couldn't go home for lunch, you mean? Yeah, or dinner. Yeah. So my mother felt that that location was good. So they opened a restaurant. And on Ridge and Houston? On Ridge, yeah, about a half a block from Houston. Between like Stanton and Houston or something? I don't know. It was on Ridge Street, and it was like about this far from East Houston. Okay. I don't know what the... sure, the cross street. Cross street is, but you can see. Anyhow, the restaurant was doing very well. Do you remember what the restaurant name was? No.
No problem.
No, anyway,
Yeah.
the restaurant was doing very well.
Yeah.
My mother was a fabulous cook. That
Mhm.
was her profession.
Mhm.
So, but she didn't want to spend the money to have a waiter. So my father would come in at dinner time, and he was the waiter and the cashier.
Wow. Okay. Was this a meat restaurant or a milk?
Yes, meat.
Yeah.
Meat, definitely.
And kosher, right?
Kosher,
Yeah.
definitely. My father was very orthodox.
Right.
Well, one time this woman came in and she sat down, and my father, can I help you? She said, I'm very hungry. I haven't eaten in 3 days.
Mhm.
Would you give me something to eat? Well, my father was a real softy. When he heard that story, he brought her a big plate of food, put it in front of her, and my mother was able to see into the restaurant because there was an opening from the kitchen
Right.
where she could put the food on like that.
Yeah.
So she was, mumbling to herself, I'm going to make a living with it. But my father was the boss.
Yeah.
So she ate the food,
Yeah.
and she was still sitting there. And my mother said, she's occupying the seat somebody else could use. Why is she still sitting there?
Mhm.
My father went out. He said, can I give you anything else? She said, how about my dessert? Those were the kind of customers they had.
Okay.
However, then they had a man. He was a peddler.
Yeah.
His wife was still in Europe with a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
And he came in for dinner.
Mhm.
And he sat down. My mother made a dish, which I have subsequently found out one of the major renowned chefs made this dish, and it was considered, very, very elegant.
Yeah.
But my mother made it. My mother used to go to the butcher on Friday afternoon, because Friday afternoon he was pretty well sold out, and she bought what he had left.
Right.
And one thing she liked was calf's cheeks.
Yeah.
And that was something that the butcher didn't know what to do with, so he gave it to my mother at cut rate. She took that and she put it in a pan, and she put in, onions and peppers and all kinds of good things. She put it in the oven, and she let it, slowly.
But it gets really tender, right?
To make it very, very tender.
Yeah.
So that was the dish he served to this man. And he was sitting there, and suddenly he let out a yell, like he was dying. My mother ran out of the kitchen. My father ran over to him. What's the matter? What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
He said, when you eat something this good, you have to yell.
That's brilliant.
So that was her customers.
Hilarious.
Then my father's prayers were answered. My mother became pregnant.
Yeah.
And she thought it over, and she decided she's not leaving the business to my father.
Okay.
Because
he thought she'd give it away.
Yeah, he'd give it away free.
Yeah.
So she closed the restaurant, and then she had a boy. My father was in 7th heaven. He named him for his father, and he was thrilled.
What was his name?
Philip. My father's name was Fievel.
Fievel.
Right. So Philip
Right.
was my older brother.
Uh-huh.
And he was a beautiful baby. And my father was in heaven.
Yeah.
He bought my mother jewelry and furs, whatever, he could afford.
Right.
And so that went until 1929. Then everything crashed. All the stocks were worthless. The only thing, as I say, my father had left was the property. And of course, the property wasn't free and clear. There were mortgages on some of that, which he couldn't afford to pay because he didn't have funds anymore.
Right.
And they went on from there. Then my mother, she was a workaholic.
Where were they living?
They were living in Brooklyn in a house that my father owned.
Okay.
It was a 2-family house. And the tenant upstairs didn't pay rent because he was a friend of my father's, so...
Sounds like he was a bit of a softie. Do you know which neighborhood of Brooklyn? Whereabouts in Brooklyn?
It was, let me see, what street? It'll come to me, 2 o'clock this afternoon.
Alright, so you call me whenever you remember.
Yeah. But it was a residential area, you know, where
Right.
they had 2 family houses
Right.
and stuff like that. And then my family, they were, you know, my father was devastated.
Yeah.
And my mother, you know, she was a practical. She you know, she said, all right, let's pick it up from here. Let's find what we can do, and let's do it. And then as the Depression set in, there were no jobs. My father couldn't find a job. He was used to being an executive, and here he was, you know,
trying to get a
job.
Yeah.
But, so they moved to the Lower East Side. One reason was because he had a sister living on Attorney Street on the Lower East Side, and he was the only son, and he had 3 sisters, and the 3 sisters doted on him. They thought he was a living end. So he wanted to be close to his sister.
Okay.
And so they moved to Orchard Street, and that's where my life began.
Orchard and what number?
Orchard, on the corner of Rivington.
Okay.
There's a big red building. It's still there.
Okay.
Still standing there.
I'll check it out.
And that's where I spent my first 10 years.
Oh wow. Do you remember what number it is?
144.
144 Orchard.
144 Orchard. The building is still there.
Okay.
And
what was it like? Was it a tenement building?
It was a tenement building, and my mother, in order to have extra money, she became the janitor.
Okay.
All right? And the building was owned by a man named Mr. Singer. And he would come once a month and collect the rents. And my mother's duties were, you know, to keep the place clean and to show an apartment if somebody was looking to rent and, you know, like that. That's what she did. And my father got a job working as a night watchman in a bank. He was good looking. He was tall for those days. You know, he was about 5'10". Today, you know, that's a short guy. But he was a handsome man. And they liked him. He was a very soft, easygoing guy, and you know, because those sisters, you know, they spoiled him like that.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's what was his job.
Okay.
And then, when I was about 3 going on 4, I started to explore the neighborhood.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And you have to understand that at that time, there was no TV, there was no radio except for the rich, and people were out on the street at all hours, all the time, and they talked to each other, and they knew each other's business, and if somebody didn't have bread, they supplied, and so on, and so on, and so on. Well, at that time, they had guys who couldn't get work. They went around with cameras, and they took pictures of little kids, and they charged a dime for each picture. I'm going to look for that picture. You'll love it.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And this guy had a unique thing. Most of them had ponies.
Yeah.
But this guy had a costume, a cowboy costume, a cowboy skirt, and a hat, and a gun, and all the pertinence. And he saw me on the street. I was about 3 and a half that time. And he put the thing on me.
Yeah.
And my mother, when it was already on me, you know, she said, all right, take the picture. So he took a picture of me. And then he wanted his costume back. And I said, oh no, it's mine. You gave it to me. That is mine. And I started to scream and yell like my mother. She didn't have patience, you know. So she started to try to pull it off me. My father heard the commotion and he came out because he worked nights, it was home days. So he came out and he sat me down in his lap and he said, listen, he said, you have to understand that this man needs these things because that's how he supports his family. Mama gave him a dime, and everybody else gives him money, and that's how he can afford to feed his children.
Wow.
So do you want his children to go hungry? And I had to think that over, and I said, no. He said, so give him back the stuff.
Oh my God.
And you have the picture. Anytime you want, you can look at it. You see your picture?
That's wonderful. You remember that?
I remember that so clearly.
Wow.
And so that was my beginning. Then I became the belle of Orchard Street. I learned math from the peddlers because they taught me. Because they said, if an apple costs a nickel, how much do 5 apples cost?
Quarter.
So he put out the 5 apples, and he said, this is 5, this is 10, this is 15, this is 20, this is 25. 25 cents is 5 apples. And that's how I learned math.
That's great.
And I had other things. My mother was busy, and, you know, she was under stress. She was stressed from the time that they lost everything. She couldn't believe it, you know. She had lucked out, married this old man, and here she's back where she started from.
Right.
So I would find places to eat lunch. I found a place across the street where the woman was a housewife, and she was a good cook, you know. Her husband owned a stable on East Houston Street. That's where the district where they owned big, he had a big garage, and he had horses in there, because at that time there were not that many cars. So he had horses and wagons and stuff like that, and he made out very well. So I would go up to her house for lunch. And she loved me because I spoke fluent Yiddish. Because that was the only language I knew, you know. My mother and father spoke that, and that's what they taught me. So I would speak to her in Yiddish. And she found me good company.
Nice.
So she would feed me lunch every day.
That's great. How old were you then?
4.
Oh my God.
Less than 4. Because my brother was born when I was 4.
Yeah.
And then I had another family that I used to go to, the Bass family.
Yeah.
They lived on Rivington Street. And I would go up there, and she had, I think, 6 children.
Wow.
But they were, the youngest one was maybe 12 or 13, and the others were more grown.
Right.
She had one son that I fell in love with. His name was Sam. And he was going to college at night, and during the day he drove a taxi. So he would come home for lunch because he parked the taxi and, you know, didn't have to pay for lunch.
Right.
So I would go there for lunch, and he would sit me on his lap, and we both ate from his plate. So, and he would tell stories about his customers, you know, that were very entertaining, and we would laugh and talk, and I became so much part of the family that when they all got jobs towards the end of the Depression, and so they decided to move to better quarters. They moved to Brooklyn. And the Caroline was one of the older girls. She had a job in New York. So on Friday afternoon, after she got out of work, she would come to Orchard Street and pick me up and take me to a movie and buy me dinner, and then take me home to Brooklyn, where I spent the weekend.
Oh, wow.
And the girls would fight to get me as a bed partner.
How old were you then?
5.
Yeah, wow.
5 or 6.
Yeah.
to get me as a bed partner because I knew all the gossip on Orchard Street. And they were interested,
What kind of tidbits of gossip?
Who goes out with whom,
right.
or who had a fight,
right.
or who got a job.
Uh-huh.
These things were of interest at that time.
They were always of
interest. Major things.
Right.
And so, and I knew everything that went on, I paid attention. Anyway, along the way, Sam broke my heart.
Oh.
He got married. And he married a shiksa.
Okay.
And they also lived in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
So one time when I came to visit, they told me Sam is married.
Mm-hmm.
He's not here today because he has a cold, so he decided to stay home. So we're going to go visit him. Mm-hmm. So the whole family and me, we went to visit Sam.
Mm-hmm.
So we were sitting there, and the wife didn't impress me very much. I mean, she was nothing.
Yeah.
So,
not worthy of Sam, right?
Huh?
Not worthy of Sam.
Of course not. There was only one person worthy of Sam. So I said to Sam, and see, I was smart enough, even at that early age, to speak in Yiddish.
Right.
So the whole family and he understood,
right.
But the lady didn't understand. Yeah. So I said to him, "What was the hurry?" I said in Yiddish, why did you grab this skinny shiksa and get married? Yeah. Why didn't you wait for me? I'm hurrying up. I'll be ready in a little while. How could you do this to me? You broke my heart. And he hugged me and he kissed me and he told me not to worry. I'm going to get a handsomer husband than he. And the family broke up in laughter when I spoke in Yiddish.
How would you say that in Yiddish? Do you know what you said?
I would say, was hast du dich also gejuckt? Dass ich gekannt warten ein bisschen von mir? Ich juck sich, dass ich darf nehmen als eine Dare Schickse. Such a skinny Schickse.
Right.
Why didn't you wait for me? Yeah. And so that was my adventures.
Wow.
And that was before I went to school.
Right. And do you, I mean, it's probably hard to remember, but do you remember what kind of food the Bass family and the other people that you would have across the street on Orchard would cook?
In those days, you cooked what you could afford to get,
right.
So, like, in other words, Mrs. Bass made soup. Mm-hmm. Because she could always throw in another glass of water,
mm-hmm.
With soup.
Mm-hmm.
However, what was her name? I don't remember. It'll come to me. Mm-hmm. She had money, mm-hmm. and her children were grown, and they were doing very well. Mm-hmm. So she would cook a different style,
Right.
She could afford. She would make chicken soup, and she didn't put in more water, and she put in a lot of vegetables. And my mother, when she made chicken soup, she put in a piece of flanken. I don't know if you know what flanken is.
Yeah.
She would put in a piece of flanken to give it a nice flavor. And my mother's soup was, my mother also worked part-time in a restaurant around the corner. It was also a kosher restaurant. It was owned by the Turks.
Turkish people?
No, their name was Turk.
Oh, right.
Turk. And when my brother was born, the circumcision was done in the house. Mm-hmm. And they came up and, they gave my mother about a week or two worth of food,
nice.
While she was recovering. My mother had a very hard pregnancy with my younger brother. Because she developed a very high blood pressure. Mm-hmm. And they took her into the hospital about a month before she was due to try to get down that pressure. Yeah. Of course, they felt, she was likely to have convulsions in trying to take him out.
Yeah.
So I stayed by the Bass family. I lived there. Because my father was totally, he couldn't prepare food for me. He didn't prepare food for himself. I mean, it was a bad time.
Yeah.
But anyway, one day they were showing me in a magazine the beech nut baby. And they said, you see, don't worry, everything is going to be okay. You're going to have a baby like this, like the beech nut baby. And I was looking forward to that. And when my mother brought him home, he had a red face and a scratch on his nose. My mother said that was because, and he weighed 10.5 pounds, by the way, because my mother sat with a sack of peanuts. That's why she got that high blood pressure. She was, very aggravated that she was going to have another baby. She didn't know where money was going to come from. How could that be? So anyway, and he was used to a good amount of food, and then they didn't give him that much, so, he was unhappy.
Cried.
But anyway, as it turned out, he and I became, extremely close. Because later on, my mother went to work, and I was in charge of him. And now I see here there are Orthodox people who have 10 children, and the older children, I think, especially the girls, are put upon because they have to take care of the younger ones. And he was my full responsibility.
What was the age difference?
4 years. And where I went, he went. Where he went, I went. So we became very, very close. And that's how I spent my youth.
Being like a second little mum.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
At some point, did you have to prepare food for him? Did you ever cook for him?
Oh yes.
What kind of stuff would you fix him?
Eggs. I knew how to make an omelet very well. And then when I got older, at 12, my mother already had a good job at Ratner's Restaurant. That was a very well-known dairy restaurant on Delancey Street. And so my mother, my father had to have fresh challah for Shabbos. So my mother would make the dough on Thursday morning before she went to work, and she would let it rise. And when I came home from school, I made the challah, and I brought it downstairs, and there was a bakery on the block, and we took it down to the basement, and the baker had his oven going, and he charged us a nickel a pan to put it in and watch it, Oh,
that's nice.
So the first few times I went, I did that, and then I realized that some of the women came down, they didn't have the food prepared, but they prepared it down there. There was a very long, beautiful table that they could use, and I noticed that they're talking. So I said to myself, I'm going to bring down my pan and make the challah down so I can listen to their stories, And of course, their stories all involved husbands and children and jobs and and a little politics got in the way, Franklin Roosevelt and stuff like that got into the mix. And I enjoyed that very much.
I bet it's like a soap opera.
Yeah, I listened carefully. And of course, they also taught me. They taught me how to make rugelach and how to make other things, because while they were making, I was watching.
Yeah.
And so that was my job. And also to wash the kitchen floor after I brought up the challah, because my father was an Orthodox Jew when he came home Friday night from shul, and usually he dragged home some guy who was divorced or widowed or never married, and fed him, to my mother's chagrin, of course. But he never came home empty-handed. And I I loved that ritual, that ceremony of my mother's lighting the candles and us coming home. And but let me tell you, all of that was only catering to my father, because when he passed away, everything stopped. The 2 sets of dishes.
Oh, you guys stopped keeping kosher?
Oh, we stopped everything that we used to do when he was alive, which I attribute to my mother. You know, she was so disappointed, and yet she respected him and loved him so much that she catered to him all the way, as long as they were married. And I think they were married to like 40 years.
Wow.
So,
and she wasn't religious at all?
No. Well, she believed in God. You know, she believed in the teachings of the Bible and stuff like that. But she was not ritual in terms of kashrus or any. She kept the kosher house. That's part of the deal. But not. It was not a big deal.
Right.
I mean, you know.
Yeah.
If you brought home Chinese food, it was okay. I wouldn't have dared to do that with my father.
Do you remember the first time you ate Chinese food, or did you eat Chinese food as a kid?
The first time I ate Chinese food was, I had a friend who lived on the 5th floor. Her name was Alice. And her mother, Sylvia, she was a modern woman. And on Saturday, she always went to the beauty parlor. And after the beauty parlor, she took Alice and me for Chinese food. So that's how I learned Chinese food. And when my mother was pregnant with my younger brother, as I say, she was not doing well. I mean, you know, she was anxious. And so she heard about a nursery on East Houston Street, where they take kids of my age. I was 4 years old at that time, and they keep them until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the whatever time. You give them a nickel, and they provide lunch for the kid, and they keep the kid there, and you know. So my mother went there, and she registered me. And the morning I was going to that school, I said goodbye to all the peddlers. I said, I'm going to school. Goodbye. I'll see you later. And I went off with my mother to Houston Street.
Yeah.
And there was plenty of kids there. And she left. And I tried, like, a little bit to make friends. See, I was the type of kid that I enjoyed the company of older people much more than my own age kids. I didn't have many friends of my own age. So I was, you know, like trying to get into a group, but, you know, they didn't know me and they rejected me. And so I said, no, I'm not going to stay here. I went out. I just walked out. I crossed Houston Street.
Big street to cross.
Big street to cross. And I knew there was a little girl up on the 5th floor across the street from me. She had a new doll in a carriage, and she didn't go to school because she was sick. So I went up there to play with her. At 4 o'clock, my mother with the belly goes,
oh, God.
She says, where's my Helen?
Yeah.
Who's Helen? Where is Helen? They don't know. So they start calling hospitals and start calling... trying to find out, the police station, and so on. Nobody knows. Nobody heard of me. I disappeared. So my mother gave them the hell, you know, as she was likely to do. She said, you know, I bring a child here, I give you a nickel, and I think I'm safe, and here you let her go out, and we don't know where she is, and you don't take care of her, blah, 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 blah. And she started to walk home. And as she was walking, the kids were coming home from school. So she stopped one kid. She knew already, you know, me. So she stopped the kid. She said, did you see my Helen? So the kid said, yeah, she's up on the 5th floor. When we came home for lunch, she was playing with the kid, has a new doll in a carriage up there. So my mother retrieved me.
Shows the kids knew more what was going on than the adults at that school.
Oh yeah. I was a
independently minded. It sounds
independently minded and very curious.
Yeah.
So out on the street, and there were plenty of people all around me.
So you always felt so safe as a kid?
I felt safe.
Your mum didn't worry about you wandering off on little adventures?
She worried, but what could she do? She couldn't stop me.
Right. And you said that you knew the peddlers. What were they like? Were there any in particular that you remember?
Oh, they were, as a whole, nice guys. And they liked me because I was a little kid.
Right.
They missed their own kids, I think,
Yeah.
I mean, there was... And they would have a variety of peddlers. They were not all fruit and vegetable guys.
Mm-hmm.
There was one guy who had a push cart.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody died and left their false teeth or their eyeglasses, he picked them up and he had them on the push cart. And if you needed a pair of glasses and you tried them on and they worked.
Fair enough.
That was the Depression that time.
Yeah.
People couldn't afford to buy new stuff.
Mm.
So...
And these were mainly kind of recent immigrants who were peddlers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There was a big influx 1920 of immigrants. My mother immigrated because she felt that something was going to burst in Europe. She was very uneasy. That's why she decided to come to America. And she wanted to drag her sister and her brother along with her. She succeeded with the sister, but the brother was already married. He had one child and his wife was pregnant with a second, and they were lost in the Holocaust. I have a picture of them too. And the sister she dragged by the hair, literally, because she had a boyfriend. She wanted to stay with her boyfriend. She didn't know what's America, where.
Right.
But my mother dragged her. And
did she live near you growing up? Your mum's sister, your aunt?
She what?
Was your aunt nearby? Was she on the Lower East Side as well?
Oh no. She lived at Queens.
Okay.
See, what happened was my mother came to America twice. The first time she came with her mother and 3 siblings, and the 4th my grandmother had in her arms was a newborn. My grandfather died shortly after he was born. So that's when the older children who were already in America decided to bring the family over. So, and they had to go steerage because they couldn't afford anything more for such a big group. So my mother contracted conjunctivitis. Of course, she was on deck, and everybody mixed with everybody else. And the 2 younger siblings also caught it from her. So when the health officer went on board, it was very
pronounced,
and the eyes were very bloodshot. So he said she got sent back.
Ugh.
My mother was 8, her sister was 7, and the brother was 5. So they went back, and an older brother escorted them back to Poland, and he left them there. They were supposed to go to my grandmother's parents. My grandmother's parents owned a cow, and they milked that cow, and they sold the milk, like Fiddler on the Roof type of thing. But they just barely eked out a living for themselves. And 3 other children would have been a big deal for them. But that was it. So my mother, at 8 years old, decided she was not going there. So she got on a train. She brought them there and left them. And then she got on a train and she was going to Krakow. She said Krakow is a big city. She'll get a job in Krakow.
At 8? Wow. Could she read, your mom? Did she learn how to read and write?
No. She never did.
Yeah.
She never did. And
did she ever learn English?
Her favorite word in English was perhaps. However, with whatever little English she had, she would go with the neighbors to City Hall to get things for them, pensions and stuff like that.
Oh, wow. So she was strong.
She was a strong.
And when she said perhaps, did that mean no, or did that mean yes, or did that actually mean perhaps?
That just meant perhaps.
Okay. Cryptic. Okay.
So anyway, at 8, she was on the train.
Yeah.
And she was small. My mother made it up to 5 feet. Was maximal. So she was little, and she sat on the train, and opposite her was a Polish officer. He happened to be Jewish, and he was in uniform, and he saw that she's sitting there by herself.
Right.
So he went over to her. He said, are you alone? She said, yes. He said, where are you going, young lady? She said, I'm going to Krakow. I'm going to get a job. So he looked at her and he said, listen, he said, I have one baby and my wife just had a second child and we could use some help. Would you like to come to my house and I will give you a few rubles for the work and I'll give you room and board. So my mother thought, good, perfect. She said yes. And when he brought her in the house, the wife said to him, you brought me another child. But never mind, my mother did her job.
She stayed there?
Yes.
And was she fond of the family? Were they kind to her?
And they were fond of her too.
Good.
So she was sitting in the park. In Europe the style is that if you have a very nice park, like on the outside, they have cafes and
like a plaza.
A lot of eateries and stuff like that. So this young man went through the park every day, and he looked at my mother. She was pretty. She was light blonde with big gray eyes, and she was very pretty. And he would look at her. Then one day he stopped. He said, is this your sister and your brother? She said, no, I'm a nanny. These are my, He said, you mean you working for the family? She said, yes. He said, how much do you make? So she told him. He said, you can make much more. I work in a restaurant outside the park, and I make whatever he told her, and she found that was okay, much better than she was making. So she quit her job as a nanny, and she went to work in the restaurant. And the people who went into the restaurant would say, go look and see who's making the sandwiches in the restaurant, because she had to stand up on a box in order to reach the counter to make the sandwiches, because she was so short. And they said, look who's making the sandwiches. But she made excellent sandwiches, and she was working there. This guy wanted to be a doctor. But in Poland, Jews did not get into medical school. So he saved up his money, and there was a professor who was willing to give lessons, so he paid him, and he was teaching him
kind of
medicine.
Under the table?
Huh?
Like under the table?
Yeah, he was teaching him medicine. So that was, and my mother would contribute her share. She would pay for the candles. Of course, after work, they went downstairs. There was a basement, and that's where they slept. Because my mother didn't have a home.
Right, because she lost the gig with
once she lost the job. So that's where they slept.
Wow.
So my mother would treat him to candles so he could study.
Wow.
And that was until the First World War broke out. And then, by then, it was a number of years in between. And by then he was knowledgeable. So the Polish army took him to be an army doctor. And they offered to teach him whatever he needs to know about doing surgery and stuff like that. He understood the bookwork, but he hadn't had experience. So they agreed to give him the experience if he would work for them. So that was that. My mother had a brother who deserted from the army. He just walked away.
Like you in school.
So they caught him, and they were going to hang him.
Jeez.
So my mother decided to go to where he was and try to bail him out.
Yeah.
So she asked some guy who had a horse and wagon, because they had to make a trip, to take her. He was an Orthodox guy, and he said, "Oh no, it would be an overnight thing."
Mm-hmm.
So he said, "Overnight he doesn't go with a woman.
Mm-hmm.
You have to get somebody to be the watchman."
Mm-hmm.
So she asked one of her relatives, would he come with them? He was a young boy, would he come with them to watch?
Mm-hmm.
So they started out, and my mother said they didn't get very far. The kid fell asleep, and he was trying to get into her, and she was fighting him off.
Okay.
This is the Orthodox guy who wouldn't go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she had a very hard night, all night long, fighting him off. Finally, she arrived, and she hired a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And the lawyer, of course, said that this is a case of error. This is not Abraham Citrin, which was my uncle's name.
Mm-hmm.
This is Marcus Winter.
Mm-hmm.
Give him a different name.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, it was dissolved, and he got off.
Mm-hmm.
But my mother contracted typhus fever. And by the time she got back to Warsaw, she was really, really sick. So they took her into the hospital, and she said she was unconscious for she doesn't know how many days, but when she woke up, she had lost all her hair, and she was like a skeleton. And she said she heard the nurses speaking in Polish, and they said, "There's this doctor who comes here all the time, and he's very attentive to her. We wonder who she is.
Mm-hmm.
She may be an influential woman, That they went by, if you were." So my mother didn't really pay attention, but then when he came in, he started to examine her, and he whispered in her ear, "If you recognize me, don't say anything, because they don't know I'm Jewish here." And,
It was her friend from the restaurant?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
And he stayed with her until she was discharged from the hospital. Then he sent her to Kreniec, which was a Polish spa. To get well, and all the rich people went there, and to recover and so on. And of course, she got all her hair back, and she was prettier than ever. So he proposed. He said, "We'll get married," and my mother said no.
Do you know why?
Yes, she had reasons. She said, "First of all, you're a doctor. I'm illiterate. I can't read and write in any language. Yes, the sex is very good now, but that doesn't last. And your friends will not be my friends. And you will get tired of me." He said, "Oh, never, oh, yeah, please." And the second reason was, she said, "I'm going to America." She said, "This place is going to fall into something terrible. I feel it." So that was that. And she left Warsaw, and she grabbed that sister. The brother stayed behind, and she went to Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Because that was a port of embarkation. Yes. And she wrote to America. They sent her money, but it wasn't enough. So she set up a box, and she said fortune telling. She told fortune.
God.
She said, "That's not hard to do. All these guys are here to go
to America
to make a trip. So if I tell them they're going on a trip, that's not a lie."
Oh man.
And she made a little money, you know, with that. And then they came to America.
Okay. And you said that she was a cook at Ratner's.
Yes.
Did you ever go there? Could you, like...
Oh, I went there every day because I had to check in with her after school. First, I went to Ratner's to check in and make sure, you know, my brother was okay, I was okay, and so on.
Would she ever feed you at Ratner's, or no?
Well, she would have fed me if I wanted, you know. But I'll tell you something. I was so stupid in those days. Ratner's in the front of the restaurant had a bakery facility. And they had very good pastries and bakeries and stuff like that. So on a holiday, if they had stuff left over. In those days, they didn't have such good refrigeration as they have now, you know. So the stuff... they didn't want to keep it, so they gave it to my mother. They gave her pastries, and she brought it home. And she would put one of those fancy cakes in my lunch, you know, which I took to school.
That's great.
It's great. And when I got to lunch, I was looking for somebody who had a Mrs. Wagner's pies. I wanted to...
So you were trading?
To trade, yeah. Yeah, how stupid could be?
What's a Mrs. Wagner's pie?
Well, because it had a pretty picture on the cover and it was wrapped in cellophane, and you know, all the kids were eating it, and
they were like apple pies and stuff.
Yeah, apple pies, cherry pies. They had different fruits, but of course, what my mother gave me was very far superior. Now I wouldn't make that trade.
You learn a little. All right. Well, that's fantastic. And just real quickly on the Lower East Side, sort of, have you lived in the Lower East Side all your life? So can you describe how it sort of changed during the 50s and 60s, 70s, 80s?
Tremendous change. First of all, the streets are empty now. Second of all, there's been a diminution of Jews down here. When the Second World War happened, a whole bunch of Jewish people moved out to Long Island, to Westchester, because during the war they made money, and they were middle class, they rose, you know, and the government didn't interfere with that. They were allowed to rise. I mean, you know, taxes were low, and so, you know, that's when all their kids went to college. That's what happened. In my time, I was the only one in the neighborhood where I lived who went to college.
Oh, yeah? What did you study?
I was a biology and chemistry major at Brooklyn College.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to be a doctor.
Wow. That's fantastic.
That didn't work out, of course.
No.
But I did the next best thing. I went into the lab, and I worked in a pathology lab.
Oh, really?
Yeah, at Mount Sinai and at NYU.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yes. Because, as I said, I wanted to be a doctor, but it didn't work out. I could have applied to NYU. See, the only way I could go would be to live at home. So I wouldn't have expenses, living expenses. And NYU had a quota for Jews, for women, and for New Yorkers.
Jeez.
They wanted people from out of town so they could go back and talk about NYU and how great it was. They didn't want women and Jews. The only Jews who got in were those whose fathers were doctors. There were a lot of Jewish doctors. They got their kids into NYU. But otherwise, most of the class at Brooklyn College who were pre-med with me went overseas. They went to Scotland, they went to Holland, to Belgium, to various other places.
To get their medical
degrees. Scotland was the preferred place.
That's interesting.
Because English was spoken, you know. So, so the ones who could afford it.
Yeah. Okay. And, like, going up to more recent times in sort of the 80s and the 90s and, you know, the year 2000s, you know, what kind of I guess what have been the main changes in the Lower East Side? You said there are fewer people and there are fewer Jews, but anything else that strikes you?
You see, as you're talking about the 20s and the late 90s, I'm already getting old, so I'm not able to get around as well as I did earlier to observe things,
Sure.
you know. But I think there is a period of, like when the co-op was built, you know, like that time, and now it's becoming more gentrified. Now they're building completely different buildings, and it's going to be completely different because Manhattan is the place of choice. It's like in San Francisco with Silicon Valley.
Right.
The people who live in San Francisco are being pushed out of their apartments to make room for the Trekkies. And that's what's happening here too.
Right. Okay. Anything else that springs to mind that you want to add? Obviously, we can sit down other times, but this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. But anything else that you want to add at this point?
Well, I'll tell you more stories.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
It's been so interesting. I didn't know that you grew up on. I didn't know that you grew up on Orchard Street.
Oh, yeah.
That must have been such an interesting street to grow up on.
Oh, it was.
I mean,
it was. Any time of the day or night, it was fascinating.
Yeah. It's